All right. Well, hello again. Time for some more data quality. Today, we're going to continue our discussion and talk about duplication. If we just take a quick gut check, real quick, we first talked about timeliness and data decay, talking about if your data is current or not. This is at the table level, not necessarily at the level of data within that table. That's sort of the next step down. We talked about data profiling, and I think what we wrote a SQL statement that is basically writes another SQL statement and allows you to profile the data and see what's available to you from a 10,000 foot level and or even looking down in more detail. And a couple of more examples here, and now we're going to talk about duplication. And duplication can come in a couple of different ways. Obviously, you can have duplication from sort of the keys value, um, and that is where well, if you're in an RDBMS or like more of a traditional on-premise data warehouse, the 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 likelihood of you having duplicates on the keys is virtually nothing because it will, the database itself will stop that from occurring. And essentially, you would either, if you're just doing an add, you would have an error condition, or if you were doing an add versus update or upsert, then you would be updating the information based upon that key match. But when we get into the big data world and keys get to be a little bit more of an abstract concept, and duplication can be something that you have to deal with. It could be a daily occurrence, or it could be something that you never encounter. But it's a good thing to set up a little process here that I'll show that is sort of the early warning sign that allows you to monitor whether or not you think you have any duplicates, and then if you have any duplicates, hopefully it gives you some information so that you can go and quickly do that root cause analysis and either push that off into a support ticket or depending on your role in the organization, uh, do any of those next steps that you need to do. So how are we going to build this out? Well, first, we are going to show just a little bit of the template here. So we'll break that down and then we'll show it in BigQuery. So we really basically have two SQL statements here. Obviously, we have this inner statement that is basically saying, select star count, but you don't need the star. I leave that in there sometimes just so that I can see the data when I'm doing the inner part of it. You're just basically saying select the count, and then you're saying I want to partition over whatever keys that you're going to put in there, and then essentially, from the table location, and you need the backtick in BigQuery, but it could be completely different in some other SQL Server or Postgres or whatever. So that's really what we're trying to do is say, and then assign this as the value count. So if we have, whatever these keys change, so these three keys, whenever they change, we're going to count how many of them that there are within that series of keys. And then with, this becomes the returned values from to this other SQL statement that's basically around the body. So this is the inner one and this is the outer one. And from here, we're basically saying select this hard coded table name. So I like to hard code the table name, it just makes things nice and clean. And then I also like to hard code the key in there. So whatever I put in there, it's easy. You can just cut and paste it within a couple of quotes. And I just say that this is what it's unique by. And you'll be amazed at, as soon as you think that there's duplicates, you're going to get it. You're going to be guilty until proven innocent. So it's good to have your ducks in a row there, and then basically you're going to be the count of that is your how many duplicates you have, and obviously the goal is to have that be zero, and you get that from the you're only returning in the where clause, which belongs to this outer SQL statement where the count from here is more than one. So I mean, you can turn this around and say where the count is equal to one, and then you're going to see the ones that have no duplication. But that's really not the point of this. So that's a lot of theoretical and somewhat pragmatic information, but how does that all work together? And I think that's what we want to talk about next. So we'll swing over to here. If I can click on the right thing. Oh, this is an interesting one. So we're going to, if I can get to the right place, we're going to use the same database we were using, the severe storm events. I didn't actually think I'd be able to use it for duplication. There wasn't enough data there, and it didn't seem like there would be any duplicates. And in theory, there aren't, but there are certainly duplicates out here, enough for us to have a conversation about the concept of duplication from a key level versus the concept of duplication from a business use level, and how you determine or how you manage through that. So the first thing I thought was interesting is you look at uh, this data set, and it talks about that it's updated hourly, and that it's been constantly being updated for God knows how long. And then even here, I thought this was interesting. Additionally, below are some queries. Run them in BigQuery UI. Run this query to see the largest hail size reported for this year. Well, we've already know from our last video that this data hasn't been updated this year at all. It's old data, and there's not very much of it. So I think it's kind of interesting. Just sort of a moral of the story kind of concept here is to make sure that the data doesn't lie, no matter what this text says here. The data says otherwise, and if this is your data or you're being told something that you're supposed to rely on, you need to make sure to cover your backside and make sure that you point out or you have an understanding that what you're being told is correct or incorrect. And I think the real funny part to me is I tried to run this query just for grins, and of course the first thing you do is come it don't even run because it's incorrectly formatted, and the fields here don't even exist. There is no current date in the hail reports table. So have your wits about you, and you can trust but validate or whatever little kitschy term makes you happy. So enough of that. We'll go in, if I can click on the right one. Yes, I can. So we'll go in and talk about this duplication. So here's our template here. And I think the first thing that we can show here is with the hail reports. And if we just sort of create just a little bit of space here so that we can see, we can run this inner query if we want. And I left the select star in here just so that it has some meaning to us as we're looking at it. So if we select this inner query, we'll see that it's going to run for us. We'll come back with our information. Here is the data. We can swing by. We can see the counts here. I don't know that we'll see one that has more than one. Well, there's one that has two from that key. Now, when we look at what we chose as a key, we chose location, county, and state. Now, obviously, that's not really probably what the key is, but it makes a nice little example of how we can search for duplicates. So here we have 5 WSW St. John, Whitman, Washington, even got the same longitude and latitude, and then we have some comments that appear to be different. And actually what this is showing you is that this record, there are actually 2 of these records. So interesting. But if we run this by its now in total, what we'll do, and we'll run that and let the results come back. And here we can see based on location, county, and state, we have 322 duplicate records. And so this is your early warning sign. And the reason for that is that if we employ some of the techniques we used on the data profiling, we just did it in an automated fashion. Here we're just doing it kind of el manual. But if we run this all together using the same strategy for each, and it just by happenstance that these keys are the same, they certainly don't have to be the same. Your tables can be built in this kind of a strategy using whatever keys that you want to have for that table. So here we can see, we do have some duplication at least at this level. Now this may be critical to you, or this may be, not even remotely critical. And but what this really lets you do is decide whether or not you need to do additional um, additional work on it. Duplication details and manual data profiling in action. So this is just some tornado reports. Let's run this real quick. This is going to bring us back just another example. We want to see who has the most duplicates out there. And so you can see this 5 ESE Curry, that one does. So here's the other part of it is that, we've decided or we've made this up to be that these are duplicates now. And we don't know that because we don't really know what the key is. It's not defined within the data. So you're going to have to determine that either whether it's given to you or whether you have to, more than likely in the big data world, you have to figure it out yourself because your tech partners probably don't know either. But check yourself, before you wreck yourself or before you look like a moron. That to me is, you don't want to go off half-cocked. So let's make sure that we look at this data, have an understanding of what we have. So we're going to see we have slightly different timestamps. We have these happen on the same day, but a couple of minutes apart. This one happened on the 7th, different times. Okay, F scale, location, county and city is the same. Longitude and latitudes are the same. And here what we have are some comments that start to be different. Ham operator reported. This is about damage. This is also about damage. So, this might be important to you if you're interested in what the actual report was. But if you're only interested in the date and when something occurred, well, now instead of 3 duplicates, you'd have 2 duplicates based on having the 2, one on the 5th and one on 2 on the 5th and one on the 7th. So duplication in this sense can be just as contextual as everything else. And so you need to understand and have an appreciation for how this data is going to be used. Let me see what we got left here. All right, so there's another way that you can approach this. It's very similar, but a tad bit different. Is that I've hard coded the keys in here, but you can actually bring the keys in as part of what you want to look at. So if we run this query here, it's a slightly different take on the same strategy, and it may be something that appeals to you more. So this is really showing you the individual records and which ones are duplicates. And, in order to do that, we've got to create that duplicate key so that then we can come down in this sort of, this one step farther, and we can actually then push that out here. There we go. So now we've taken it down just so you just see the one record as opposed to the multiple examples here. So, so how do we get to know duplicates? I think that's another interesting conversation, and we can start to add in information. So when you're first looking at data, you could try to say like, well, location, county, and state doesn't seem to be working for me. How am I going to actually get to something that actually is a little bit better? And so what happens if we were to put time in there? I mean, time sounds like a logical kind of thing to use. So if we use time, and it's interesting that time is, since it's a reserved word, but it actually does work. I was surprised that it did. So if we run that, we're going to see a little bit of different data here. Okay, so now we've brought down our duplicates. That's all we have left for duplicates with time. And we'll take it another step further. And what if we were to use timestamp? You would think that timestamp would be unique all on its own. But it's not. Make sure you highlight it, or BigQuery's going to have a cow. All right, so we still got one record here where timestamp, time, location, county, and state are all identical. And I think it's when we finally come back in and put comments in here that we determine that it's not a 100% duplicate record. But, the point of this you watching me stumble around writing code. The point of this is just to show you've got to do a little bit more due diligence. You have to do a little bit more work. The other point of this is to show that if you do it this way here, it becomes a little bit more cumbersome because if you get no results, then you don't have anything. You don't have a record to display. You don't have a record that shows 0 in there. And I'll show you how we can fix that, but we'll just go here and run this one because this is the one without the comments, and we can just see that record. It just shows a little bit of sort of the due diligence you've been doing or going to do. Identical, identical, identical. We've got slightly different longitude and latitudes, and we have slightly different comments. So it isn't until we get all the way down here that we actually can delineate between one record and another. And we really can't even determine which one's the most current record other than interpreting what the comments say, because we would normally, hang our hat on the timestamp or the time, but they're identical. So we've got to come up with a different strategy, or we just have to plain here take the first record we come to if we're trying to use this data. So what else do we have? So here, let's run this one here. So the point of this last little query here is more just to talk about if you're running this in a script or if you are putting this in a dashboard, however you do that and want to do that in Tableau or Power BI or whatever tool that you're using, is that it's nice to be able to have the record come back and show you 0 as opposed to having no data. So that is that warm fuzzy feeling when you glance at the report, or you come in, you run this here, let it come back, and of course your data is going to have a lot more. It's going to take a lot more time, but it's good to be able to see this and know that everything's coming back regardless of whether it's 0, whether there are duplicates or not. So that's really the point of this. And I think that is about it for duplication. Quick, down and dirty. And what do I have down here? Oh, we've already gone through all that. So next we're going to do, in the next video, we're going to do a little bit of manual data profiling / duplication. I like to think of it as building a funnel, and it'll help you. It'll help you and see the common table expression CTE and get familiar with that, because that's a real powerful way to query data where you don't need to have a bajillion sub-selects, which I'm not a big fan of. And then we'll show you how to get to kind of complete the profiling and the duplication work. And then we'll move on to the next data quality dimension. So that's it for today, and I hope this brought something for you of value. So later on.